Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. Hope you're having a great week. I'm the host of this weekly podcast, Tony Roig. If we haven't met before, it's nice to meet you. I'm glad to have you with us here on the podcast. If you're a returning listener, as always, good to connect with you and to be able to share with you some ideas about the mental side of pickleball. You know, the mental side of our game and our lives is such an important part of our experience, right? Such an important part of our relationship with pickleball and with everything we do in life. And when we spend some time working on it, listening to this podcast, reflecting, reading some books, which I'm going to get to in a second, you know, that work that we put in helps us feel better on the pickleball court, play better on the pickleball court, and just get through life in a more constructive, positive way. And so this is time well spent by you, and I salute you and congratulate you for spending some time on the mental side of your sport and of your life. In this week's podcast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different. In the riff, I'm going to talk about a Reddit post that I came across reading one of the newsletters that's pretty common out there called The Dink. Not pretty common, but pretty well read is what I meant to say. Pretty well circulated, called The Dink. And there was an interesting Reddit thread that they called out, and it called my attention because it has to do with the idea that, you know, improving can rob you of enjoyment in the sport. And there was a lot of engagement with that Reddit post. So I thought it would be an interesting subject to talk about in the riff because it's something that my guess is that you've dealt with or at least thought about in your own journey. So I want to see if I can give you my 2 cents on that. And then the main part of the podcast today, I'm actually going to read you a section or some of the not an entire section, but a chapter, if you will, a part of a chapter from the book that we've been working on and that is pretty close to completion. And I'm going to update you on what's going on with the book and give you some more information about that. Before we jump into the podcast, a couple of notes. One is wanted to let you know that we have been working hard to put together a specific academy that is tailor-made for 50-plus pickleball players. And that'll be coming out in the next week or two. If you're listening to the podcast, my guess is you're on our email list, so you'll be able to find out about it there. If you're not on our email list, you know, obviously your choice, but recommend you get on our email list. You know, we share weekly tips in a newsletter. You get to know what's going on with us and know about events like this. We know that the economy is pretty wonky right now, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, right? That's just a reality that everybody's going through right now. And so we're figuring everything out and finalizing it. But basically what we're going to do is come out with the academy at a price that reflects what's going on with the economy now. So, you know, if you're on an email list, you'll get information about that if it's something that's of interest to you. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you was an update about the book. If you listen to the podcast for any length of time, you know that I've been working on a book. It's one of these things that, you know, started off as a project of a certain type. And then as I started writing, as tends to be the case when you start working on a project, you start uncovering other aspects of the project that are interesting. And it ended up being that the concepts that we were dealing with on the mental side actually fit into 3 different categories, which are perspective, play, and progress. And each one is very different. Now, this podcast, I'm not going to go into detail on the difference of these, but in the future, in a future podcast, I will. And as we launch the book, I'll explain more why each one of those is so important. And we've talked about it, you know, briefly in other podcasts in the past because I've explained that, you know, we're going to do a podcast on perspective or a podcast on play, a podcast on improvement. For example, what I'm going to read to you today is from the perspective book. And then the riff we're going to talk about is actually about the improvement journey, right? So there's being able to categorize the area that you're thinking about on the mental side can really help you not jumble too much together, and then have clarity in the area that you're working in. So anyway, so as I came upon the realization that there's actually multiple, or there's several different areas of the mental side. You can't just do mental and then just cover everything. Then the project morphed, and so I've decided that what I believe is the biggest lift for you as a pickleball player and as a human being is perspective. I believe that's the one that can help you in pickleball, but also help you in life. It's the one that has most carryover to life. Play is really good, but play is more about what you're doing on the pickleball court. Again, it's good. So when you're playing and when you're doing activities like that where you want to have focus and things like that, then obviously improvement is super valuable in pickleball and in life. So those concepts will be really helpful as well. But perspective is the bigger picture one, and it's the one that I hold dearest and nearest to my heart. And so that's been the focus of the book. The first book that we're going to put out is going to be on perspective, and then we'll go to play, and then we'll go to progress as we move along. But anyway, so the book the book has 5 parts, an introduction and 5 parts. And basically, if you know anything about the way that I do things, or, it's it's organized, right? It's like we flow through, we're going to explore you as a human being, right? You, the player. And that's what I'm going to read to you today, is a section about that from that part. Then from there, we talk about the sport. And that, if you're a system student or if you've done trainings with us, you've probably heard the term framework. We do it here as well, right? What's the game that we're playing, right? Let's understand the game that we're playing. Then we talk about, we start incorporating us into the game, right? The next part. So basically like bringing us into the game and also understanding our role inside the game, and then next steps kind of a thing. So anyway, that's where we're at with the book. I'm going to try and be more, just more sharing, if you will, about what's going on with the book, where we're at. I met with the team this past week, last couple of weeks actually, and we've been figuring out the next steps that we're going to take. My hope is that we'll be able to roll out a digital version of the book within the next, say, like 90 days on the outside, hopefully 60 days, might be a little tight 60, but that's what I'm hoping for. And then we'll roll out the digital version. We'll make it available to you if you listen to the podcast. Anyway, so I'll make an announcement on here. I'll give you a place to go get it. And that's what we're going to do. And then after that, we'll roll it out to the general public. So those are the plans, and I'm super excited about it. I think the book has a lot of, interesting information that will help you gain better perspective about your relationship with pickleball. So without further ado, I'm going to read this to you now. This is straight out of the book. And what we're dealing with here, just to give you the context of it, this is the part 1 of the book, which is you as an individual, in this case as a pickleball player, right? But remember what I said about perspective, that the perspective concepts are concepts that extend well beyond the pickleball court. And what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with these hardwired traps that are built into us, right? They're things that are just in how we're constructed, right? How we've evolved, and understanding those, right? And how they get triggered can then help us avoid the potential downsides that come from them. So this is hardwired trap number 2, and it's the negativity bias. So another evolutionary thought process we need to tackle along our journey to improved mental acuity is our bias towards the negative. To understand this bias, we will again go back in time. Just as our ancestors needed to gather food to survive, they also needed to be aware of potential immediate risks in their environment. Those who were better at detecting and avoiding danger had the highest chance of surviving and passing their genes down to future generations. You and I are the descendants of this group, and by extension, also have a well-developed negativity bias built into our lizard brains. And just to give you context on this, I've already introduced this in the book. The lizard brain is basically our reacting brain, right? It's our non-thinking, just reacting to a stimuli brain, which is super important part of our getting through our lives, and super important part of how we got here to begin with. All right, so continue with the book. So there's a heading called Surviving the Tiger. Here is how our negativity bias came to be. Our ancestors walking along the savannah might hear a rustling in nearby tall grasses. Our ancestor could dismiss the rustling as nothing more than the wind and do nothing. Do that enough times, however, and eventually the rustling grass hides a tiger. In this eventuality, our ancestor is no longer alive to, well, become our ancestor. Rather than dismissing the rustling as nothing, it is more likely that every time the grass moved, our ancestor assumed that there was a stalking tiger and immediately sought refuge. This is how our ancestors survived to make babies, leading eventually to you and to me. This is the negativity bias. Even though the rustling grass most likely did not indicate a danger, those who survived, hence our ancestors, were the ones who repeatedly assumed that the rustling indicated a tiger waiting to strike. The survivors were those who were biased toward the negative. To make it as far as they did, our ancestors most likely always saw threats everywhere, even in what was most likely just a rustle of the wind. These threat-aware genes were then passed down to us. This sort of hereditary wiring is strong and creates in us a predisposition to finding the negative, the tiger in the grass, rather than settling on the positive, just rustling wind. Rustling during a pickleball game. The potential trap set for us is that this negativity bias wiring is not suited for many of our modern activities, including a friendly game of pickleball. Let's explore the most traumatic pickleball event for many players, popping the ball up. A negative event, sure, but objectively, not that big a deal. In fact, when you reflect on a pop-up, you start to understand that they are not an outlier. They are but one part of the game we all play. Even the pros pop the ball up with some regularity. Yet our brains often magnify the pop-up and its negativity well beyond its due. The feeling we get when we pop the ball up far exceeds what we should, objectively, feel. This is the negativity bias circuit in action. It's as though we're always on the lookout for a negative outcome. We're expecting something bad to happen. When we pop the ball up, which is guaranteed to happen at some point during a pickleball game, we see the worst possible outcome as having come true. Our reaction to a pop-up should be the same as any other shot gone awry. Yet because of our negativity bias, we make it more. We're expecting the negative, and so we see the negative. Avoiding the negativity bias trap. As with the survival circuit trap, simple awareness of our negativity bias is often sufficient to sidestep the trap. When there's an event, a pop-up for instance, and you feel terrible about it, it is probably just your negativity bias activating. To avoid falling into the trap, reframe the event. Ask yourself, was whatever the event, in this case a pop-up, really that bad? 99.8% of the time, your answer will be, no, it wasn't that bad. Reserve a negative response for those situations that truly warranted. Here are a few examples of that was bad, and no, it's not that big a deal. So differentiating between the two. First, you threw your paddle after missing a shot. Okay, we can agree that was bad. You can feel terrible about it, at least for a moment. Number 2, you missed a shot, even the easiest put away ball. No, it's not that big a deal. Just part of the game. No negative feelings are warranted. Your partner missed a shot. Number 3, sorry. Your partner missed a shot and you either said something or acted in a way, I roll with an audible exasperation, that made your partner feel bad about their miss. Okay, that was bad. You can feel upset about your behavior. Consider apologizing to your partner. Number 4, your team was up 10-4 you then miss several shots in a row as your focus dissolved and your team ended up losing 10-12. While it's okay for you to constructively examine what happened to improve yourself as a player, it is not okay for you to allow your negativity bias to take over and make it a world-ending event. Other than constructive self-examination to be done later to improve play, this is a clear, no, it's not that big a deal situation. As with all lizard brain traps, avoiding the negative bias trap starts with a better understanding of your circuitry. When the circuit gets activated and you start feeling down or bad about something, ask yourself, is it really that bad? And then preload your answer, which is the same answer you would give me or any other friend of yours. Come on now. Of course, it's not that bad. Pickleball is a positive experience. There is, frankly, nothing that can happen on a pickleball court, short of injury, that is objectively negative. Maintaining this perspective will allow you to avoid the potential for negativity from what are, in the end, pickleball events and nothing more, even the dreaded pop-up. So hopefully that kind of thinking, right, gives you a sense of how you can avoid these sorts of negative feelings, bad feelings when you're playing pickleball. That's the conclusion of the book, by the way. So I should have said that. So I've finished reading from the book now, and I'm just elucidating on it or elaborating on it a little bit. These kind of ideas that you can, if you understand what's happening, right, what the trigger is and what's getting triggered inside you, then you can say to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. I don't have to feel this way. I don't want to feel this way. And it doesn't make sense for me to feel this way, given the input that I've received in the book's example, a pop-up. And so it allows you to move past these automatic reactions that we have, because you understand that a lot of the times what's happening is it's simply something that's just built into you, right? It's part of how you're constructed. And you understand that you can, in fact, take actions to avoid the negative feelings that come from there. So hopefully you enjoyed that little snippet from the book and get a better sense of what the book is all about. I'm going to dive into the riff now, but before I do, I wanted to give a couple of shout outs here. I promised you that a couple of weeks ago, I believe. So I have two reviews here on Apple Podcast, and I appreciate y'all leaving the reviews. It's first of all, it's always nice to connect in a way, right, with these reviews. Come in here, read them, and get a sense of what's happening. Are we is the podcast helping, not helping, whatever, whatever the review needs to say, it's fine. But it's good to find out what's going on. And as I mentioned at the end of every podcast, it helps us reach other players. So this is from Carla G, mindset, and 5 stars, which I appreciate. I've been playing for a few years and still at 2.5, 3.0 level. I have watched and listened to the better pickleball content, mainly on YouTube. It's hard not to compare myself, but I don't play but once or twice a week. I really appreciate the realness in reality, but positive thinking and moving. Love that some info is tailored to a mature player, smiley face. Carla, it's our pleasure. One thing I would suggest, if I may, is there's absolutely nothing wrong with playing a 2.5, 3.0 level. If you're playing once or twice a week, you're enjoying the sport, you're expanding your mind through the process of listening to this podcast, that's amazing, and keep doing it. So this is the next shout out goes to, this is from Dee Did It. I love that. It's all about the journey. 5 stars again. Thank you very much. This is hands down the best pickleball podcast out there. There are plenty of them to choose from, but if you want to get the most out of your pickleball journey, you must listen to this one. The quality of your journey is largely dependent upon what's going on in your mind. Couldn't agree more. And Coach Tony's analysis of how we talk to ourselves and how it impacts our game as well as our overall experience is full of gems. Thank you for that. This is the one I referred to last a couple weeks ago about Tonyisms. My mind is now stocked with many Tonyisms that have totally revamped how I approach the game. Thanks, Coach. Dee, it's my pleasure, and thank you for leaving that review. So, and I'll try and continue to do the shout outs. I think it's just helpful to reinforce what we're doing here inside this therapy community. All right, let me chat for a few minutes here on the riff about this idea that. So it was the idea of improvement, perhaps affecting how you feel about the sport, and the feelings that are being expressed here are perfectly valid feelings. They make sense given how they're viewing it. But I think it's more a question of, we're better off reframing it and then coming at it a little bit differently, which I'll explain. So. If you don't know what Reddit is basically a place where, it's basically like a community. You can go in there and post something, and then there's conversation about it. And so this player posted that basically they were playing somewhere around the 2.5 level, right, which is perfectly fine. And the observation was that they felt that if they were to improve, right, if they were to get serious about their improvement, then perhaps they would lose some of their joy, some of their enjoyment of the sport. And they cited their experience with other players that they had noticed that other players who improved, they looked like they weren't enjoying the sport as much. And then there was a bunch of comments in there, and you know, I mean, as normal, I mean, some comments were friendlier than others, but I felt like all the comments were, there were two schools, if you will. One school of thought was, yeah, that makes sense, right? You know, I'm in the same boat. You know, I've lost some of the enjoyment with improvement, so you know, I'm not pursuing improvement because of that. And then there was another band or school that was basically like, you know, I still enjoy the sport and I'm improving, and I think, you know, basically it's silly not to improve because, you know, I continue to enjoy the sport and so do my friends and things like that. So, you know, the two schools were improvement undermines joy potentially, and the other one was no, you can improve and continue to enjoy the sport. And I think here's where I think there's maybe a disconnect in the conversation. I would submit to you that, and I've seen this personally, right? I've felt it, and I've seen it with other players, and perhaps this is what you've seen as well for yourself. But I'd reframe it from it's not the improvement part that itself, right, that leads to the potential lack of enjoyment or stress when you're playing. What happens is, in my experience, is we start building expectations for ourselves and our performance and our results. And so what happens is, if you go back to like the very first time you played pickleball, right? So you just stepped out on a court, someone gave you a paddle, you're like, I don't know what's going on. And, you know, you probably lost, right? You probably lost badly. And who cares, right? Doesn't matter, because you had nothing invested in the sport. You're like, no big deal. And investment, not improvement, just you hadn't played it at all, right? So no expectations. And then what happens is you like it, right? Obviously. So you started playing. And then at some point, right, you started to care about the results. But at some point, you started to say, you know, let's say you had a session that you won a lot of games, right? Maybe all of them, right? So now you're like, oh, you know, I can win this, right? I can win at this. And so the next time you played and you didn't win them, what happened? Now your expectations aren't met. And that's where that frustration and disappointment can arise. Now, I will say that you can have some frustration or disappointment from the improvement process itself, but that's not what this poster and the other comments were referring to. They were referring to like not having enjoyment in the sport because you had improved. So basically, like, you start off as a 2.5, you stay at 2.5, you're going to have more fun because, you know, you're just chilling and staying 2.5. Whereas if you become a 3.0 or a 3.5, now you can't enjoy the sport anymore because now, you know, you're a 3.5, and so you don't enjoy the sport anymore. And I think that's where there was a little bit of a disconnect in the conversation, because I would submit to you, you can enjoy the sport at any level, whether you're a 2.5 or a 5.0. You know, you can enjoy your experience with pickleball. And so the fact that you're either one level or another level shouldn't really detract from your ability to enjoy the sport itself. Again, separating it from that improvement journey piece, which is a different conversation. As I mentioned earlier, dividing these things up, I think, is helpful in terms of how we approach them. And it would avoid the kind of disconnect that happened in this conversation. The conversation I mentioned in Reddit, where there was, you know, about it, enjoying the sport or not enjoying the sport based on improving. And I generally push back a little bit when players say, you know, that I don't care how I do. Because even though winning and losing isn't your primary motivator, right? And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be how you guide yourself in terms of how you feel about yourself in playing. You are, in fact, engaging in a competitive activity, right? And I'll compare it to something like Frisbee. You know, I happened to be at the beach a few weeks back with my family, and we were tossing a Frisbee or a football around, you know, all these different things. It didn't matter, right? Whether you dropped it, you know, you tried, you did your best. And if you caught it, you know, if you dropped it and it was easy, you're like, oh, I should have caught that one, whatever, normal reactions. But it wasn't, we weren't keeping score, and it wasn't like we were competing with each other and things like that. So that kind of activity, okay, you know, nobody's keeping score. When you're playing pickleball, you know, you're keeping score, right? And you're trying to win the rallies. They're trying to win the rallies, right? So there's that competition that is there. And I think it's perfectly natural to want to try and do better, right? As you play. And it doesn't mean you have to go drill 7 hours a week or anything like that, right? But it's just the idea that, like, you know, okay, I don't really, I keep on getting attacked early in rallies and I don't know why. and knowing why you're getting attacked early in rallies, and just, side note here, it's probably because of short returns to serve. But knowing that this is happening, and it's negatively impacting my ability to succeed in a rally, and then knowing what the cause is, and then knowing what the solution to the cause is, that's just problem solving, right? That's just puzzle solving. And I believe that's one of the beauties of our sport, is the challenge it provides to us, right? Now, I want to be clear, no criticism of a player who wants to go out there and bop the ball around and have fun and run around. I got no criticism of that, right? But we are playing a sport that has scoring in it and is a competitive activity because of the nature of the sport, or the nature of the activity, I should say. And so I think it's natural to want to improve. And so if you feel like you want to improve, I think that's a perfectly natural feeling from engaging in a sport. And that's frankly what keeps CJ and me continuing to do what we do. Sleepless nights, getting up early, staying up late, all that kind of stuff to get quality coaching done, because we want to try and help players who want to improve do the best they can. But in terms of your progression as a player, I think that's a perfectly natural feeling. Now, what you want to be aware of is this idea of the expectations creeping in too much, and grading yourself just on the wins and losses, as opposed to whether you did the best that you could, in that situation, in that day, in that game, based on how you came to the game, which is a whole different thing than whether you won or lost. So hopefully that helps, kind of frame out this idea of improving, not being mutually exclusive with enjoyment, and that those two, you can improve and enjoy, but framing it in a way that I think is more constructive than just a back and forth that says, yes, you can because I did it, and no, I can't because I didn't, because you understand that what's really happening there when you have a lack of enjoyment, oftentimes it's not the improvement piece, it's the expectations piece that crept into your mind and set up an expectation that then you're not meeting, and so you're not enjoying it as much. All right, so that's the riff. I know this podcast, I don't know how long it's been going, but it's probably a little bit longer than our normal podcast. But I hope you found value in the podcast. If you did and have a minute to rate and review it, we appreciate it. And as always, if you have a moment to share the podcast with your friends, that would be awesome. Not just for the podcast, but for your friends. Because remember, if you enjoyed the podcast and if it helped you out, it'll probably help them out. And I think they'll enjoy it as well. I hope you have a great week. I will be at the PPA in Atlanta next week, doing some work up there. So next week, you're going to have guest host CJ Johnson coming into the seat and chatting with you about some CJ stuff, which I'm sure will be phenomenal, as it always is. So be on the lookout for that. And then I will be back with you in a couple of weeks when I get back from Atlanta. Be well, and I will see you in a couple of weeks on the next episode that's hosted by me of Pickleball Therapy. Be well.